Hello, everybody. My name's Steve, and I'm going to be the moderator for the next panel. I am the founder of DMZStream, which is a TV network catering to entrepreneurs and businesses. I am also the CEO and founder of Any Size Deals, which is a market network for real estate investors. I'm super excited to moderate this next panel on retail and the changing landscape. We have three terrific panelists. Before I get into the panel, just a little bit of housekeeping. At the end of the panel, I'm going to open it up for audience questions. So if you have any thoughts or questions, just hold on to it. The last 15 minutes of the session will be open up to the audience to ask questions. With that said, let's get right into it. I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists. First one is Anjee Solanki. She's the National Director of Retail USA for Colliers. She's been in the industry for over 22 years. And next to her is Bill Leitner. He is the managing principal of Merchant Retail Partners. And last but not least is Ron Wheeler, who's the CEO of the Sembler company. They're one of the leading developer owners and operators of shopping centers in the Southeast. With that said, let's get right into it. First question is to you, Ron. What are your thoughts on the state of the retail market?
Well, it's obviously a really interesting time to be in retail. There's a lot of things going on in various sectors. When you look at the grocery market, you've seen a tremendous amount of growth in the number of grocery stores out there and the number of organic and specialty grocery stores and everyone else who sells groceries. And I think you're seeing at this point that that strategy and all those stores they've added has caused some people to pause and rethink some of their plans. For the last 2 years, you've had prices falling, you've had price deflation in grocery. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how all of these players who are expanding into all of these stores handle that situation and handle price deflation. And it'll be interesting to see if there's any consolidation in that industry. On top of that, you've got a lot of interesting things going. We talked about the malls earlier. The earlier panel talked about the malls, and obviously there's a lot of really good malls in the country. And then there's some where you've seen a tremendous amount of space coming back onto the market. Between Sears and Macy's alone, there's about 20 million square feet that's going to come back onto the market in inventory. And you're seeing how mall owners are redeveloping that, bringing grocery stores in and other uses in that they haven't used before. You've also got a lot of space. About a year ago, you had Sports Authority put 15 million square feet on the market. And between the office guys merging, there's about 7 million square feet. So there's about 42 million of shadow anchored space coming on the market.
No, I don't mean that.
And from a construction delivery standpoint, we're at about a third of the deliveries that we were at the peak. So that's really interesting. And then obviously you have the whole interplay between the internet and bricks and mortar. And you're seeing retailers trying to adjust to that, heavily investing in their own, the bricks and mortar guys heavily investing in the internet-based options and trying to become that omni-channel marketer. Then you've got the internet guys who are now, Amazon and others who are building physical stores. So you're kind of seeing a merger of the strategies between those two types. So just a whole lot of things going on in our industry right now.
It definitely seems like it. And Bill, from your perspective, where do you see market opportunities?
Say that again?
Where do you see market opportunities?
We see market opportunities for our bucket of capital we play with primarily in the secondary markets and trying to bring together a program that involves typically necessity retail, which is kind of defaulting us to a grocery application. And then we're looking to the other categories of health, wellness, beauty, spa, fitness, and pets to kind of round out the offering.
And Anjee, what are you hearing from retailers? What sort of shopping centers or mixed-use centers are they more interested in being involved with?
Retailers today are really looking at optimizing their portfolios. So I think as Ron mentioned, there's a right sizing that's occurring in the market. Retail today, in my opinion, is evolving at such a fast pace. And what I mean by that are retailers are looking at their portfolio, they're shedding locations where they're bottom performers, looking at optimizing where they're strong in those markets. As it relates to, the type of product, where to go, I think they're really looking at the number one thing, and that's footfall. High footfall, great co-tenancy, strong demographics in a dense market, and also from a mixed-use perspective, because ultimately every penny counts, and customer behaviors are changing day in, day out. So how do you capture that dollar, whether it's online or in the store? So that to me is really critical when a retailer is looking for sites.
And Bill, where do you think we are in the investment cycle?
You know, for retail, it's hard to tell right now. We've had a plentiful capital has been available in the marketplace. You've certainly seen a lot of real estate opportunity funds that are justifying acquisitions, buying at 5 caps with some level of value add play, trying to drive the cap rate up to an 8.5 or 9, and then feel like they've created some level of value. So I think there's arguably been a good bit of asset inflation or somewhat of an asset bubble in place for quite some time. I think from where we are in the investment cycle, it's really going to be a function of how this whole thing plays out with the headwinds that retail is facing right now. With so much press, negative press about retail right now, you wonder if just as an asset class, it's going to become a systemic issue. And with that, I think there may be a second scenario like we had in 07, 08, and 09, where you can buy at a significant discount and justify the risk.
What are your thoughts, Ron?
I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there in retail, in all markets. Retail is very sub-market driven. There's excellent sub-markets out there with good demographics and good leasing. I mean, when I look at our portfolio, and if you look at the public REIT portfolios, there's very strong occupancy in what there is now, and we've got relatively low delivery levels. So obviously, I'm in the business. We've been in the business for 50 years in retail. We see a lot of positives in it. We see great opportunities to invest in centers that are not operated as well as they should be and underutilized. We also, as Bill mentioned, we like secondary and tertiary markets. We think there's opportunities there because in a good retail submarket in a secondary tertiary market, you're getting much more return than if you're competing in those urban areas for those very low cap deals. And when you listen to the earlier panel, the institutional guys, they're not going to want to get into the markets where they can, talk about seeing the farmland within 20 minutes if they take off. That's fine with us. If it's a right submarket and the right retail and the right mix, then we see plenty of opportunity to develop and buy in those markets.
And I just wanted to add to what Ron said. I think the tenant mix is really critical especially when you're looking at kind of the evolution or how the project is positioned in a market. So if you're looking at, for example, a power center, and you know that there are certain retailers that are starting to kind of either right size or close, what is that next kind of use category that's missing, that's void in that marketplace? And it may not be retail. It could be non-traditional retail. So I think to your point, Ron, looking at it from a proactive and an opportunistic approach is really critical from a tenant mix.
That does make a lot of sense. I have a question about the overall economy. One of the main initiatives of the current administration is corporate taxes and reducing corporate taxes. I know the House Speaker is working through a proposal to reduce corporate taxes from 35% to 20%. And if you're an exporter, so if you're a U.S. company that exports goods, you don't have to pay any taxes on revenues generated from the exports. But if you're an importer, so if you're retail that imports goods, you have to pay 20%, right? So that's a concern for companies like Walmart and JCPenney. What have you heard from retailers? Start with you, Anjee.
It's still in discussion. I think there's a negative impact, definitely, because margins are constantly getting squeezed. There's also a capital reinvestment retailers are looking at is how do they take the capital that they have and transfer that to e-commerce so they can optimize the two, brick and mortar and e-commerce. So, I know that there were several CEOs from various retail brands that went to DC, I think it was actually last week, and I haven't followed up on some of the outcomes, but I know that there's been high concern from a retailer perspective, especially when, as I mentioned, everyone's trying to vie for that $1.
Steve, I think it's a delicate time for a lot of the retailers. So you have a lot of the brands that have now been acquired by private equity. And so you have balance sheets that are more leveraged than they've been historically. But yet if you look at the speed of the retail evolution going on right now, and that evolutionary process seems to be incredibly capital intensive. So those folks that have a tough balance sheet, I think are going to have a little bit tougher time weathering the storm. And so I think that's something that put some delicacy, if you will, and then supply chain management. I think you see some retailers out there that seem to have their supply chain mastered, right, and are demonstrating solid margins, good occupancy cost, and are Amazon resistant. But then you have a lot of others that are still playing catch up. And I think with those, if they were burdened with an additional tax, it may be somewhat problematic.
Did you want to add anything, Ron?
No, I think they got it. I'm good.
Okay. We're going to switch up a little bit and talk about experiential retail. When I say experiential retail, Anjee, what comes to mind?
Oh, there's a laundry list. Experiential retail to me is really, it's educational retail. So how do you educate the consumer so that brand gets stickier with that customer? So you may have seen or have been into Verizon stores where they've created what Apple has as kind of their geek corner, where you can actually learn about the product you just purchased and learn all the different accessories and tools that go with it. So you're going to see educational be a big focus. Also from an experiential standpoint, you're seeing technology used, and I know we'll be talking about technology here shortly, but for example, food. The food sector is just exploding. I just read a stat that I think it's 80% of shoppers will go on a shopping trip specifically to purchase food, whether it's to-go food, grab and go, sit down, etc. So we're seeing that increase, and we're also seeing that increase in terms of overall GLA. That food is a big component because it's creating conversation, community. It's a gathering component. So, like I said, I think experiential can be defined in different ways.
And who would you say, in terms of retailers, who do you think is doing it right? Bill, what are your thoughts?
Well, I kind of look at it from a little bit of a different perspective. I don't know if I have a good answer with the retailers. I think they're all, trying to kind of mold that clay. Who would have thought that Nordstrom would have a bar in the men's department, right? Or that you'd share a bottle of wine with your wife at Whole Foods. But I think that the whole idea of experience retail goes above and beyond just what's happening in the store. And so I think it's put more and more pressure on landlords to not only create the experience in the store, but also create experience at the overall shopping center. And so it's introduced into the overall operations of your various shopping center events, for example. And many years back, for everybody that was around when we were doing lifestyle centers, you felt like you had a sense of place with wide sidewalks and pedestrian-friendly and tower features, and everybody's going to come hang out like kind of the community park. Well, now we're having to kind of integrate a whole events program into that lifestyle center to create the experience, which also goes into the experience within the stores.
And Ron, who's the onus on? Is it on the retailer or is it on the shopping center developer to really focus on that aspect of the retail experience?
Well, it has to be a partnership, and then they just have to fight about who has to pay for it. So if I've been on panels before where the developer talks about all this experience they're going to create, and then the retailer says, well, we're not going to pay for that. So, because they're focused on their capital investment in their internet business and their own stores. But it's, I think when you talk about experience in retail, it can be any type of experience, but you just know it when you walk into it. You know when you walk into a store and there's this not right feel. So just walk into many, many department stores and there's just this feeling that you get. It's not very exciting or terribly interesting. So where you're seeing the tendency of all our centers go is to where people are going and actually participating and experiencing things and getting things that they can't get on the internet. So you've seen a dramatic shift in how the tendency of our centers is right now. But from a cost standpoint, it's going to fall mainly on the developer and the owner, but in most instances, I think the retailers will come around and eventually contribute to it as well.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to what Bill said about just, looking at the overall project. So it's not just walking into a store, but it's when you actually walk or drive into a project. I was actually in Huntington Beach, and I pulled into the parking garage. And typically, parking garage, you just go, oh gosh, I'm going to be going in circles. This was interesting because I entered the parking garage, pulled up to the parking space, and just, labeled was, smile, you found a parking stall. And you just have to chuckle and laugh because it made you just feel, okay, I'm ready to go and shop and spend money, versus going, I just spent an hour driving around a parking lot. So I think to your point, developers are trying to create a really good experience from the minute you enter the project itself.
And how has that translated into actual dollars? So like Lululemon has like yoga classes, you can get drinks at Publix. Lowe's has a whole VR room where you can put on a VR headset and see what your finished kitchen or bathroom is going to be. How has all this stuff actually translated into sales?
I don't know if there's actually a quantifiable number, but what I've heard is that you're getting stickier with your customer, basically. And the more you can learn about them, and they can learn about you, there's a brand alignment, and I think then what you're going to see is this continuation of a customer coming back over and over and over to either purchase or use the service.
So it's about building relationships with your customer.
Yeah, I think it's about maintaining relevancy and maintaining, creating a brand through your merchandise mix, and then also creating a brand through your event and your placemaking aspect. Steve, we don't have a large enough portfolio to really speak to kind of the macro aspects of what events and everything does for your shopping center, but we had one test case where our sales were flat, and 4 years ago we decided to, in this certain market, go out and acquire basically every marquee event for this market. So we do a wine festival and a fashion week and a songwriters festival, and many of them have been recognized by Wine Spectator and USA Today and some other stuff, really driving traffic. And since we started doing this, which is heavily subsidized by the landlord, we've seen sales uptick 3.5% to 4% or so, just by virtue of every 90 days trying to have a marquee event at the property.
Yeah, and that traffic is great, but the retailers need to participate in that, and they need to make sure that they are offering something significant in coordination with those events as well. And the ones that do that will benefit from it, and the ones that just sit there and wait for the clients to come in may actually have less traffic if you do some big event where they really aren't buying in and participating. So
you're thinking if there is an event, have some sort of promotion that's tied to the event, so you take advantage of the traffic that's coming. So from a long-term perspective, do you think this is the way to sustain shopping centers and malls going forward?
Well, from my perspective, there's several centers that we work on where we're really trying to create the main street of the community. So people want to live in a community. They're really looking to find ways to reduce the amount of time they're away. They're spending a lot of time working, et cetera. So they like to go back to something that feels like their own. And so if you can position a project where it becomes the mainstream, and you have the ability to ask the customer to participate in that, then what you're really creating from a landlord perspective is you're creating your project as a venue. So you're hosting these events, you're keeping the project top of mind, and eventually and hopefully what you see is these increases in sales that will ultimately have the retailer push into percentage rent.
All right, so we're going to switch up a little bit and talk about the tenant mix. So question to you, Ron. What has changed in terms of what you see in the shopping centers?
yeah, so when we look at our grocery anchored, and I don't know if our slide is up there, but we've seen, okay. So we've seen, I was curious about this because, all this news about how the internet is going to kill our business was interesting to me because when I look at our statistics in 2015 and really since then, we were as well leased as we had been since the pre-crash of 2007. And so I went through and looked at like centers, this is grocery anchored centers, the shop space in those centers to see what kind of tenancy we were having. And what I saw was a fairly dramatic shift to the categories of health, beauty, and wellness and fitness from what I would call traditional retailers, and then a fairly steady amount of restaurant space, because I think a lot of the restaurant growth was going to outparcels and malls and freestanding locations. So that traditional space is defined as anything that isn't those other categories. So it could be a card shop or a bookshop or a realty office or a clothing boutique, somewhere where you're going in and buying something. And what we've seen and what we've tried to direct our efforts towards is that health, beauty, wellness, and fitness category. And we've seen that shift pretty dramatically in like centers that this chart shows from 2009 to 2015. And then when I thought about that for this panel, I went and looked at the deals we are working on today, and you've seen that shift even more dramatic, so that only 17% of the space that we're leasing in our grocery-anchored centers today is not that health, beauty, wellness, fitness, restaurant type of category. So it's been a really dramatic shift. It's been one that is intuitive and you would expect because you can't do those certain things. You can't go to a spa or a doctor or get your hair cut or your nails done or go to a gym or go to an urgent care center over the internet. Those are things you have to do in person. And those users have realized that the shopping center with its convenient locations at high traffic intersections that they can get in and out of and park easily in and access is better than maybe some of the space they were in before. So that's kind of the result of what we've seen. And we expect that trend to continue.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I get very passionate about retail, but I think to your point, I look at one-click shopping. Well, this is almost like a one-drive shopping experience where you can go and, go to the gym and get your hair cut, get pet food, etc. And I just think that convergence of medical, wellness, beauty with grocery, drug, etc. is just going to expand and more so from a mixed-use perspective.
Yeah, when you look at groceries, still, 98% of the groceries bought in the U.S. today are still bought in a brick-and-mortar grocery store. So you've got that anchor that draws all those people in, and then these other things keep them there in your center.
From a profitability standpoint, is it any different than when, let's say 2009, when it was 48% traditional versus now where it's 48% wellness, beauty?
No, the rent structures are very similar, and the lease structures are similar. I think the one challenge is that the pure health industry specifically, which is doctors groups or orthopedic centers, things of that nature, they aren't as sophisticated in the retail space as some of the other retail users are, the hair salons and things that have come into centers traditionally, but they're getting more and more educated every day, and we're trying to educate ourselves on how their business works so we can capture more of that business, so that we aren't just getting the doctor group that happens to drive by our center, but we're getting the best doctor group in that area. So that's our challenge in the health industry and in our industry, since they're kind of merging here, is to learn how each other work.
And Bill, what are you seeing in your centers?
Well, Steve, what we wanted to try to illustrate by the slide was, these 4 buckets that are designated in these evolving grocery formats. They really are to represent kind of the 4 buckets that we all remember that ICSC had designated for the different retail platforms. So for 15 years we knew about community center, neighborhood center, power center, right, and lifestyle center are now open air fashion. And what's of interest is that of those 4 buckets, really only one consisted of a grocery play, right? And so it was a grocer that had 45, 50,000 square feet with gold wings of shops on both sides, 10,000 square feet on both sides, and 2 to 4 out parcels out front. Well,
that's a beautiful thing, by the way.
Absolutely. But what's of interest now is that every one of the ICSC definitional boundaries of retail formats really has grown to include a grocer. And so for us, the top one's a community center that we are developing. To be honest with you, we had a Walmart neighborhood center that was willing to come with us, but we couldn't get the balance of the sports Ulta and PetSmart deal done. We landed Publix, and everybody came aboard. What's of interest in the neighborhood center format, I thought, is the Earth Fare Market and Cafe. If many of you don't know Earth Fare, it's about an 18,000 square foot little gourmet grocer, a little mini Whole Foods. And what we thought was of significant interest is Michael's has taken a co-tenancy with them, right? And Michael's has always been a significant category killer, power center type format retailer, and yet they love the idea of going up next to a gourmet grocer that's got a recurring, sticky kind of customer. The next one is our power center format, and Kroger growing up was 55, 63,000 square feet forever, and now they're in 120,000 square feet and kind of almost leading a big box type deployment. And then the last one, I think, is the one that has absolutely evolved the most, the fastest. There's a lot of lifestyle developers in the room, and we all remember the formula of 5, 25, 75. If you had in a 5-mile ring, you had 25,000 households making $75,000 of median household income. Then you could do your what we call the Fab 4, the Fab 5, which would be Ann Taylor, Victoria's Secrets, Chico's, that group. And then that would lead you to a restaurant program, et cetera, et cetera. Now that format has changed so demonstrably. And so at this last center, we've got Anthropologie, Lilly Pulitzer, and Vineyard Vines, but they hug up next to a Publix. and are more than happy to have the Publix there doing significant sales volumes and helping to drive that customer, to the open air fashion center every day.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's you're seeing this kind of co-tenancy or marriage between your daily needs and your soft goods, et cetera, I think people are realizing, or I should say retailers are realizing, that the frequency of visits are increasing if you have grocery, drug, your staple needs. And so it's all about dwell time. It's all about how can you keep the shopper there for that cross-shopping. And I think Michael's, Aveda, Tommy Bahamas, et cetera, are starting to, kind of take the rose-colored glasses off a little bit.
I agree. And I think, Steve, to go back to what Anjee was saying earlier, the speed at which the merchandise mix changes and the speed at which you have to backfill with a new and relevant tenant. At one of our centers, we had Johnny Rockets and a Moe's Southwest Grill, and just wasn't really kind of driving the program or the balance of the story that we were trying to tell. And so we backfilled with Evercrisp, which is, an organic restaurant where everything is grown within 60 miles of your location, in a gastropub with a lot of craft beers and offering a real neat menu. So we think that added and enhanced our overall story at the center without a doubt. But that's a very expensive proposition. But yet you got to stay on top of it in order to stay relevant.
That makes a lot of sense. We're going to switch up a little bit to e-commerce and tech. What are your thoughts in terms of retailers? How well do you think they're adjusting or adapting e-commerce? I'll start with you, Anjee.
I think that, if you look at those that have adapted, I think I just actually read an article, Neiman Marcus is creating this, call it cosmetic mirror, where if you go to one of their sub-brands within the store and you try on makeup where someone's guiding you through the whole process, the mirror will actually capture your face, the products you've used, how it was applied. You can go back home with those products and do it yourself. Now what they're doing is they're taking that data and that information and they're capturing that, and so they're going to start to repurpose that information so they start to track your behaviors. And so what you'll start receiving then from a Neiman's or others is you'll start receiving very specific, customized, call it alerts or offers, etc. And so that's one way that technology and e-commerce are kind of in brick and mortar are kind of colliding. I also think that there are also other brands that may not be as either mature brands that are no longer relevant or stayed relevant because they did not put the capital investment in. And so you're starting to see them shed. I won't name names, but Wet Seal, etc.
And that was going to be my next question. Which companies do you think are actually doing it well? My question was going to go to you, Bill.
Well, I think some companies have weathered the Amazon effect and are on the backside of the bell curve. And I think, one that comes to mind is certainly Best Buy, right? Which everybody, 3 years ago was talking about showrooming and the death of Best Buy, and they'd go from 45,000 and 30,000 square feet down to 12,000. And, by managing their supply chain management, by engaging the customer, and then offering a higher level of customer service with installation and everything else through the Geek Squad, they are truly on the backside of the bell curve, the Amazon effect bell curve, and feel like they really, have it going right now. It looks like Amazon is trying to put great emphasis on fashion and cosmetics, so it'll be interesting to see how that sector within the overall retail sector weathers the storm. And I think it's going to come down once again to supply chain management and whether or not they've got a balance sheet that gives them the capital flexibility to invest.
I'm going to have one more question for Ron, and then I want to open up to the audience so you guys can ask some questions. So my last question to you, Ron, we started with you, we'll end with you. Do you think Amazon could potentially do to retailers what Netflix did to Blockbuster? I should probably end up on a higher note, but it's just...
I do, and I'm getting out of the business as of next week. Now, Amazon has done an amazing job, and they've really kind of forced other retailers to look at how they do business. If you look at most companies that are kind of weathering this okay, they have small increases in their brick and mortar stores, but they are making enormous investment in their internet business, and that is starting to pay off for a lot of retailers. You're seeing, relatively flat holiday sales for a lot of retailers, but double-digit sales of their e-commerce business, granted off very small bases. So, there's some companies that started out very small and were definitely behind the curve. But, omni-channel retailing is going to be how the future is going to look. Studies have shown that people that shop in an omni-channel environment spend more money than people that either do pure play e-commerce or pure play brick and mortar. There are some companies that are going to do very well without really participating heavily in e-commerce. TJX is a retailer who's doing as well as anybody and really doesn't play in that space. But the other guys are really going to have to learn and invest. And, I don't put anything past, Walmart is investing billions and billions of dollars. They're backing off on their brick and mortar investment. They're making huge investments both in their internal technology and buying other companies that are in that e-commerce space.
Budget.com for $3 billion, right?
Yeah, and they bought a few other companies too, and they'll probably buy another one next week. So I think a lot of those guys are learning how to play in that space, and I think it's really telling that a lot of the e-commerce guys are now getting into that brick and mortar space as well. They're recognizing the value of that. And really from an expense standpoint, Amazon really isn't cheaper than in a lot of categories than if you go and shop at something at another store. I think as they learn and they hone those delivery services, they're all going to kind of figure it out.
Steve, I thought an interesting comment or presentation by someone in the industry lately was doing a comparison of Amazon to Sears. And what Sears catalog did for Sears and what the internet has done for Amazon. And by virtue of being able to get that Sears catalog into thousands of homes throughout the United States, it allowed Sears to grow to become the 800-pound gorilla. And what's been interesting in looking at all the enclosed malls, where you had Sears as an anchor, and you look at the REA agreements, you realize just at some point in time, and in the 70s and the 80s, how much strength and power they had. They were absolutely the biggest player in town and controlled them all. And now you have Amazon doing the same thing with the internet. The point that the gentleman was trying to make was that the catalog sales maxed out at 10% overall. Right now it looks like internet sales are at 9%. He was saying he thought it may go to 13, but he thinks it may level off the same way catalogs might.
Yeah, and if you look at increases in sales of e-commerce players, at one point they were growing by 30% year over year. It's shifted down to about 15%, again on a larger base, so a relatively large amount of money. So it'll plateau at some point.
It's a good point. The only difference is with Sears, you have the limitation of the physical location, right? So if I live in, let's say Cameroon, which is in Central Africa, I don't have access to Sears, right? If I live in Cameroon, I have the internet, I have access to Amazon, right? So as time goes by, Amazon gets access to more customers. I would say that's the one thing that slightly different from Sears being the dominant player versus Amazon.
Yeah, and just to add, let's not forget, brick and mortar store brands are still seeing 90% of their sales coming from in-store shopping.
No, absolutely. So are there any questions?
What do we see about groceries, Publix as an example, getting into delivery and e-commerce of perishables versus, say, just non-perishables? What's the impact going forward of a shopping center there where they're all exploring this delivery aspect of their business too? Does that get legs? Does it not? How does it change the shopping center and their footprint, what they may need next 10, 15 years? Or any other?
Yeah, I think it's going to impact in a couple different ways. Just some kind of anecdotal feedback. So we were sitting in a civil engineer's office, and they just gotten the engagement to roll out one of the grocery stores, brand new prototype that was have an app, and you pull up and get your groceries delivered to your car. And the idea is that they were just going to add a couple of new parking spaces. It wasn't going to need to change the whole format, but he was making the case that they had to add labor in order to be able to offer that service. A company that's headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm from, is called Shipt, S-H-I-P-T, and It's kind of immediate delivery for the grocery store business. They've signed up Whole Foods, smaller regional chains like Western Supermarket, Piggly Wiggly, Publix in our neck of the woods. And it's having a significant impact in a lot of markets that are trying to grow in certain residential areas. So in Chattanooga, for example, where it's always been really difficult to deploy other residential lots up on the mountains that are in and around the area, everybody kind of lived on Signal Mountain and Lookout Mountain. But you had to drive 35 minutes down the mountain to get your groceries. Well, now with ships coming to town, you're seeing all these new areas open up on the residential space with immediate kind of 4-hour delivery on all your groceries.
Any other questions? Oh, right, the lady right here.
I've never thought about it, Andy. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't really thought about it. I'll get back to you later on that. One of the questions was would I put Amazon lockers in my center? And I haven't put enough thought into that to give you an answer. Would you? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, if an Amazon locker creates a daily trip, then that's another reason for people to come to my center, and they're 100 times more likely to stop at the other retailers if they're coming to the center. So personally, I would do it, though I'll say a lot of the companies that I work with and that work for me don't necessarily agree, but my perspective is you just want to create a reason for people to go.
I totally agree with that logic, because even Amazon initially, they would sell their competitors' products on their site, because the logic, like there's Amazon Prime, they have their own shows, but you can subscribe to Showtime or whatever you want on there, because the logic is whether you come to my place or not, you're still going to have access to that information. I'd rather you be here, right, because you already have a reason to be here, even if you're giving dollars to my competitor, but you are going to purchase something that I'm offering. So I do agree with that logic.
I agree as well. I mean, and you're probably seeing also Amazon staffed, call it, locations too. And, they're taking 15 to 2,000 square feet, so why not?
Any other questions?
I believe you said that traditional brick and mortar retail sales were somewhere around 8 or 9% of the revenues. Do we have any idea of the profitability of those sales compared, the online sales versus the brick and mortar sales? I've heard that the returns are much higher, which eat into margins, but of course the occupancy costs.
Well, I think it really goes back to, there's actually a list of the top 100 retailers that are like your traditional Home Depot, Best Buy, etc. What they've done is they've figured out a way, if they really provide, or I should say, create a very good in-store experience, and create a second purchase when that person returns something they purchased online, their margins are far, far greater. They're in the 40 to 50% range. So what they're trying to do is train staff, basically. So if you buy something online, return it at the store, and the staff is ready to go with, what about this other item or this secondary item for purchase? Because that's where they're seeing their margins actually increase.
I have a question over here. Oh, it's fine. After she goes, you're next. You're next. I'm sorry. You're next. Go ahead.
I was going to springboard off of his question, actually. I know that this has kind of been, people have been hunting for a solution for years to an alternative to the sales per square feet metric. With the lines becoming fuzzier and fuzzier, have you guys found some sort of profitability metric other than the not as effective sales per square foot number?
I think it's still in its infancy in terms of that conversion, because we're so accustomed to the per square foot. We're also looking at leases and saying, okay, so based on your store and online sales, how does that get transferred into potential percentage rent, et cetera? But I think from my perspective, well, most of our institutional clients, as well as retailers, are still using the per square foot. I think retailers are getting much more sophisticated in terms of their right sizing for a market. So they're not creating a prototype that they're going to roll out in every market. So they've come up with, call it a, option A, B, and C, urban, suburban, et cetera. And they're doing a lot of feasibility studies as well, not purely just based on demographics, but I was just looking at a site selection tool, and we have, I think it's close to 200 attributes. I mean, 200 attributes, I don't know who looks at 200 attributes anymore, but retailers are looking at that information, and that boils down to an example is infrastructure, meaning is there strong enough infrastructure so when I'm doing that point of sale, that transaction between myself and the customer is as quick as possible and seamless. So it's getting very data heavy right now and very ops heavy from a retailer perspective.
Go ahead.
Given all the concepts you've discussed, Amazon lockers, and haven't even talked about driverless cars, common area events, and kind of a whole different relationship between the landlord and the tenant than we've had before. Longer term thinking, does the landlord-tenant relationship and paradigm even hold up as retail evolves? Because it seems like, given that nature of that relationship, I give you a check and you give me a space, seems to be something that would structurally hold back the evolution of all the stuff you guys have been talking about. So is that a domino to fall later, and what do you think about that?
What we've tried to do, Mike, in order to try to implement a kind of a landlord store manager chemistry, if you will, for lack of a better word, is we get all our store managers together and plan and plot strategy for events and ways to kind of continue to make our brand relevant. But I will promise you this, that trying to get a lease negotiated to get a $2 square foot marketing fee from corporate while you're negotiating a lease remains incredibly difficult. What we've tried to do is create what we call an arts and entertainment district by creating a 501c3 organization where we've gotten some of the retailers to contribute to it. It's a nonprofit. Every dollar that goes into it has to be spent at the property level, so it's completely transparent. They're involved in creating the calendar and creating the events, and seems to be something that's a little more innocuous and not so difficult to negotiate.
Yeah, I think the concept of the space check relationship is something that you really can't survive with today if that's your sole relationship. You have to understand what their business is. You have to understand how they're profitable, how they drive sales, where they're getting their sales from, and even down to the point of working with individual tenants as to how they can be more successful in their space. So it's that paradigm has to change for us to be successful going forward.
Yeah, and just to add, I think, Ron, understanding their core business and their core values is very important. And you can do things so simple where you're not spending the money, where, as I said earlier, your project is your venue. So basically, SoulCycle, for example, they'll bring out, their spin cycles into the common area, and they'll do a quick 10-minute, spin class. It's getting them recognition. It's also providing, kind of a level of entertainment, so to speak. So I think it's just understanding the business and then trying to figure out how you can captivate and create some good synergy there.
We'll take one more question. We have to wrap up for the next panel. In the front.
I like the idea, Mr. Wheeler, you were talking about how people will always need to have services done. And do you think that really that's where the future of the commercial real estate, the retail is going to go? That eventually stores, the people who sell products, they're doing this kind of add-on service thing with the makeup features and providing, drinking in the store, or maybe they'll do a quick 10-minute session or something like that. But really, that's more of stopping the bleeding before they make a permanent pivot in the future? And do you think that really retail is just going to be more service-based than ever?
Yeah, it's not the future, it's now. That's what's happening now. And the people that have understood that and adapted to that the best are going to be the ones that survive. So you've seen that happening within grocery stores for quite a long time now, and in the tendency that we see in the centers. If you aren't creating a experience or providing a service or something that's better defined than what you can just do on the internet, then you're not going to survive. So that's today's reality.
I think they're trying to capture the same thing that Apple is in their store, with brand identification meets service. So I think you're spot on.
All right. Thank you so much, Anjee, Bill, and Ron. It was an awesome time. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.